I am continuing my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am reading in a chronological order of events, not according to publication or volume, so I will be skipping around a bit as I move along. We again are reading in Esther. We will be in chapter 2. Chapter 1 is the deposing of Vashti as queen for her disobedience as a way of stabilizing or preventing the destabilizing of the family unit within the society. So now we read chapter 2. Ahasuerus seeks a new queen. Mordecai presents Esther. Esther pleases the king and is chosen as queen. Mordecai exposes a plot against the king. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, Let there be fair young virgins sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegai the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women. And let their things for purification be given them, and let the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And the thing pleased the king, and so he did so. So the king is starting to miss his wife. He's no longer drunk, he's no longer angry, he's like, I'm kind of lonely. And so this is the plan. Bring in a pile of young women, marry them all, because that's what it means by bringing them into the house of the women. We're going to marry all the women, and choose among them all one to be your queen. Sounds like a good idea to the king, so here we go. I would also point out that this definitely sounds a lot like the origin of the Cinderella story, where in Cinderella, all the eligible young maidens are brought in, and we have a big ball, and the prince chooses one to be his queen. Here we have the king bringing all the young women in, choosing one to be his queen. Verse 5. Now in Shushan the palace there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So when it says, which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, that's not talking about Mordecai. Mordecai was not the one carried away in the time of Jeconiah, because that was in 600 BC, and we're down into the 400s now. This is 130 years after the captivity, or 120 years. No, it was Kish who was carried away captive. That's why we trace the genealogy back 4 generations, Mordecai, Jair, Shimei, and Kish, because Kish was the one brought into captivity, and so we're tracing his genealogy back to the captivity. That's what that's all about. Verse 8. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him. And he speedily gave her her things for purification, with such things as belonged to her, and 7 maidens which were meet to be given her, out of the king's house. And he preferred her and her maidens unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not shewed her people, nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not shew it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did, and what should become of her. This is interesting here, that the king, upon seeing Esther, is more pleased with her physical beauty than anybody else. And so he does give her preferential treatment. He says he rushes in it. He makes sure she has everything she needs for the wedding night. He wants her. She's his first choice. And so he rushes her through in order to have the night with the king. He wants his night with her, see if she's good to be the queen, because she's the first choice. He gives her 7 servants, 7 maidens. And when it says that he preferred her and her maids unto any place of the house of the women, in the house of the women, this wasn't just, one room where all the women slept. The house of the women was a wing of the palace, or a complex of buildings where each woman had their own private quarters. And when the king visited the house of the women, you know, they had their common area, and then he would go to their private chambers, their private living area. And when he visited her more often than he visited any of the other women. Now Mordecai, I like that, he walked every day. He would go and walk by the windows of the house of the women so he could check on his niece. He always wanted to make sure he knew what was going on. He was still protecting her. Verse 12. Now when every maid's turn was come to go in to King Ahasuerus, after that she had been 12 months, according to the manner of the women, for so were the days of their purifications accomplished, to wit, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with sweet odors, and with other things for the purifying of the women. Then thus came every maiden unto the king. Whatsoever she desired was given her to go with her, out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and on the morrow she returned into the second house of the women, to the custody of Sheashgaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came in unto the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and that she were called by name. Now this is the arrangement here. This is how this works. They were all brought into the house of the women. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are married to the king at this point. The house of the women is just where the women live. And then they were 12 months purifying the myrrh and the oils and all the stuff, cleaning them up, making sure that they're presentable. This is a bit of an extreme. It's a bit extreme, but this was the general practice in Persia. So they all come in, and they're all there for 12 months, and then each gets their one night with the king. At which point, they are no longer in the main house of the women, but are in the house of the concubines, because now they are married to the king. This isn't just him having sex with them, he is marrying them. All of these women, the king will now have 127 wives, maybe 150 wives after this. So the king is marrying each one of them. And once they've had their night, the only time they get to spend with the king after that is if the king asks for them by name. Now, a lot of modern people hate this arrangement, especially feminists. This is just an evil thing. How can you treat women like this? But consider that these women, all of them, they're married, and so they have a legal claim to be cared for. They will never go hungry. They will always have a place to live. They are always going to be in a comfortable situation. There are a lot of women, especially back then, who would have had no problem with this. They would have enjoyed it. They get to spend their time with friends. If they're called to the king, good. If they're not, they still have a good, comfortable life. They're not in the streets. It wasn't a bad life for these women. These women were not being mistreated. They were married to the king. Verse 15. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in unto the king, she required nothing but what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, appointed. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all them that looked upon her. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces, and gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not yet shewed her kindred, nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. I also want to say here, a lot of people will claim that these women were all just kind of kidnapped and rounded up. But no, it was sent to the princes to find willing virgins. And it says that when Mordecai, it said earlier, when Mordecai saw the decree, that's when she went up. This was not just the king grabbing women. This was a proclamation sent out, as I said, just like in the Cinderella story. He sent out the proclamation, and women were presented for consideration. Those who were accepted were brought into the house of the women, prepared for their purification, and received their time with the king. Now Esther, she is made queen. She gets the royal treatment here. But you'll know also it says that she left, the commandment was that whenever the woman came out to spend her day with the king, she could bring anything she wanted with her, and she got to keep it. And apparently all the other women were being a bit excessive in what they were bringing, wearing many necklaces and bracelets and just being gaudy in it because they were going to be able to keep what they were able to bring with them. But Esther, in humility, just said, let the chamberlain pick out my outfit, pick out what I should wear, and that's all I'll take. I don't need anything else. Now let us finish out this chapter. Verse 21. In those days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those who kept the door, were wroth, and sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. And the thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name. And when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So this is interesting. Mordecai originally went and walked under the windows of the house of the women. But when Esther's made queen, she's not staying in the house of the women anymore. She's staying in the royal palace. And so he goes to the king's gate to keep an eye on her, to know what's going on. And while he's there, he overhears this conspiracy. He tells Esther about it. Esther goes and tells the king, the conspiracy is uncovered and the men are executed. And in the whole thing, Esther says she certified it to the king in Mordecai's name, meaning that he got the credit, not Esther. Mordecai was given the credit for uncovering the conspiracy. So we'll leave that here and we'll read chapter 3 next. So see you there.